I want to welcome Mayor Francis Suarez, who's joining us today, and thank you for taking the time to talk to New Yorkers and to the Jewish community. I think all of you will enjoy the mayor and this conversation. He has become a national leader on the political scene in America these days. We got to know him because he participated in our International Mayors Conference back in 2018, I believe it is, right, Akri? We got to know him. I want you to know, Mayor, that in just about every conference that we've had, somebody has come out of that conference and become the president of their country. We have a few of those. So it's what we call in the Yiddish language, mazel, which means, luck. So things work out well sometimes when you join us. We all live in what's, a troubling, world today. We have our domestic issues to deal with. We've got global issues. We've got wars. We have a crazy political election coming up shortly here. And it's a breath of fresh air for someone like me who gets to meet many of these leaders around the world to engage with Mayor Suarez. He has done a remarkable job in the city of Miami. He's won several elections with 86%, 78%. I don't get 78% in my own family, not alone an entire city. And through these difficult times, whether it was COVID, whether it's been domestic terrorism, inflation, economic difficulties, he has kept his city vibrant, growing, advancing, and become a true leader in the country here. Mayor, what we want to talk about is some, issues that relate certainly to Americans, but in particular to the Jewish community. We see growing anti-Semitism, domestic terrorism, the discourse today about Jews and pro-Nazi movements and things of that sort, whether things are taking place on the left or the right, both extremes are problematic to us. It's not the same country we knew 5-10 years ago. And we want to talk to you about some of those issues, how you have maintained, a growing city, adaptable to, the changing situation, fairly peaceful, not having the craziness and the kinds of, you've got the same problems, but, not to the extremes that we see in New York and LA and some of the other major cities in the country. We want to know how you did that, how you maintained that. We need some lessons from you.
You want the secret sauce?
Yeah. So the mayor's, he's supported the Jewish community. As you know, he's got a large Jewish population. He's kept, anti-Semitism pretty much under taps. I mean, we don't have the same degree of problems down there as we have in much of the country today. He's been supportive of the state of Israel. I believe you've taken 3 trips there. And he's been a true friend to the community and to all Americans. And, we look forward to doing more things together. I'd like to turn this over to you so you can tell us what you're doing, how you're doing it, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So Mayor Suarez, my good friend, welcome to our discussion we have periodically with the Jewish community at the American Jewish Congress. And I turn this over to you. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Jack, for the invitation. Thank you for, inviting me to be part of that visit in 2018, and obviously for the work that you do at the American Jewish Congress, an organization that has been working tirelessly to protect and stand up for Jewish interests all around the world for more than 100 years. The work that you've done is vital, and we've seen it now more than ever, how important it is given the landscape that you just described, how how much turmoil there is in the world, how much anti-Semitism unfortunately has risen. And, let me start by talking a little bit about Miami, right? And how we see this moment and how you talked a little bit about our secret sauce, right? Because it interplays into how we protect people of the Jewish faith who live in our city, and why we do it as well. We are fervent capitalists. We believe in this country. Many of the people in our city were exiled from their country of birth, because a leader there said, give us all your property, give us all your businesses, and don't worry, we'll make everybody equal. And they did. They made everybody equally poor and equally miserable. And it's a false promise, which tries to convince people that government can be the answer to everyone's problem. In Miami, we do three things, and we do three things very, very well. We keep your taxes low, we keep you safe, and we lean into innovation. So on taxes, I've lowered taxes to the lowest level in history. We have a one tax rate. We don't have a state income tax, which is part of the reason why we're seeing such a huge migration from New York, Illinois, and California, as well as other parts of the country and the world. So we've lowered the tax rate that we do control to the lowest level in history. And we saw last year 12% growth, the second most growth in recorded history. So what we saw was a correlation between lower taxes and tremendous growth. So that was one of the first things we did. The second thing we did was, with that growth, we actually got more revenue. So even though we lowered taxes, we actually received more revenue. And just to put it in context, we have a balanced budget. We actually have about a $30 million projected surplus for the year. And we have close to $200 million in reserves. We'll probably have to be over 200 million by the end of the year. We also were just upgraded by Standard & Poor's just a few weeks ago. So in the midst of a federal debt crisis, where the federal government is on the verge of basically violating its debt ceiling, potentially declaring bankruptcy, we were being upgraded, and we had hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank account. So we did things very, very differently than what we're seeing in Washington. With those extra resources, we have used them in a targeted fashion, in the way that's appropriate for government. Number one, we never got into this defund police nonsense, which unfortunately became political, and should never have become political. So we've hired the most number of officers we've ever had. We have labor peace between our police officers and us, which is important because they're well compensated, well motivated, and we give them all the best technological tools to do their job. So to put some of the numbers in context, we last year had the lowest homicide rate per capita since 1964. That means on a per person basis, it was safer to be a Miamian last year than any year between last year and 1964. That's just a shocking statistic. And it's one that you don't see anywhere in the United States. This year, the news is even better. So right now, we are close to 40% below last year's record low homicide per capita rate. So we're 40% below that number on an aggregate basis. We're also about 70% below on shootings. And one of the other things, a metric that I think is important when you look at how is your police department functioning, is officer-related complaints. Last year, we went down 15%. This year, we're down 8%. And just to give you last year's number, because it's a full year number, so you get a full picture. We had 235 complaints. That doesn't mean 235 instances where officers made a mistake. That just means 235 total complaints against 330,000 citizen interactions. So 330,000 times our residents picked up the phone and called for help, called for police, called 911. And only 235 times did they complain about the service that they received. So that's less than 0.1%, which means that our police officers, who have arguably the hardest job in America, no job in America pays less with more scrutiny and more risk, and are doing it in a phenomenal way that any business in America that had customer service success at a rate of 99.9% would be extremely happy. So we've kept people safe. And of course, that extends to the Jewish community. We monitor national events. There are many times where we will put specific, at no cost to a shul or to a synagogue, we'll put police protection there based on national incidents. We're very proactive in using legislation to support the Jewish community. For example, in 2020, I sponsored a resolution which passed that called for the adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism. and it directed the manager to ensure that the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism is available as an educational resource for the Department of Police and other City of Miami departments and agencies responsible for addressing anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination. So that's just one of many. We've condemned attacks against the state of Israel on multiple occasions when its enemies and the enemies of democracy and the enemies of prosperity and peace are trying to infringe on their sovereignty. And it's something that we do proudly because we feel very connected to the state of Israel. We feel like we're the mirror image of Tel Aviv. If you look at Tel Aviv on a map and you look at Miami on a map, it's almost like a brother and a sister. They look like mirror images of each other. And we feel a deep sense of connection because there's a religious connection, right? We come from a Judeo-Christian background, and a lot of the most significant both Judeo and Christian landmarks, religious landmarks, are in Israel. So we feel a sense of connection. We also, of course, love the fact that it's so entrepreneurial, the startup nation sort of feeling of it, and of course, the fact that it's a democracy, in a region where there aren't many democracies, right? So, and it has historically been and should continue to be, America's best ally in the region, and a great connection point for our country. So that's what we do on safety. The last thing is on economics. So we like I said, we keep taxes low, we keep people safe. And the third thing that we do is we lean into innovation. We want to create the most innovative city in America, if not the world. I call it the capital of capital, or the epicenter of capital. We want to be the central aggregation point and deployment point for capital in the world. And we think we're well positioned for it. It wasn't always our reputation. We were kind of seen as the capital of Latin America. We want to metamorphosize from that into the capital of capital, because we believe that we're geocentrically positioned in the middle of New York, Illinois, California, South America, the Middle East, and Europe, and eventually Asia, where you can be a direct flight from all of those mega markets, and neither one of them is a direct flight to all of the rest. So we think we're well positioned strategically to take advantage of our position in a way that can create more prosperity, more efficient flow of capital and decision making. And we think that that's something that, from a vision perspective, we want to work on. So the way we've radically disrupted everything is we saw that the economy of the world was changing and is going to continue to change very rapidly and very disruptively from a highly industrialized world, which is important because obviously supply chain is a major issue and a major vulnerability that we saw with COVID and obviously with what's happening in China and Taiwan. And also this sort of new era of digitization where financial products are being digitized, where artificial intelligence is coming up as a real tool, but also as something that people are afraid of, where quantum computing is going to change the game in terms of how you can interpret information, how you can, creates a cybersecurity risk. So I think that for us, we leaned into that disruptive moment, and we're now number one in the nation in wage growth. We're number one in tech job growth. We're number one in foreign direct investment. We're also number one in pandemic recovery. So we've created, and our unemployment rate is 1.7 or 1.8%. It's the lowest in America. So we have the lowest unemployment rate in the country. So when you think about how does that influence other things, right? Like homicides, for example, or violent crime. It turns out if you're employed, if you're resourcing your department, and then of course other metrics like happiness and health. We're number one. We're ranked the happiest city in America, and the healthiest city in America. If you're happy, you're healthy, you're working, and you feel safe, there isn't an opportunity to create violent crime. And so we're seeing that's sort of our recipe for success on that front. Get people to work, put people to work, have an innovative economy, increase their wages, and then of course make sure that they're happy. I've introduced, and I just came off being the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Was president of all the mayors in the United States up until Sunday or Monday, and at 11 o'clock. And one of the things I wanted to attack was mental health, right? I wanted to make sure that as a country, we were providing cities with the tools needed to make sure that all of its citizens are physically healthy, are mentally healthy, are developing skills to deal with adversity and become more resilient, so that it affects medical outcomes into the future. We have a very large, probably the fourth largest public hospital in America. And we want to make sure that we do everything we can to reduce some of the costs that we see being passed on to our hospital system, which of course benefits people on a quality of life basis, right? My biggest concept, other than being the capital of capital, is understanding that, everyone focuses on return on investment. And I think that's a legitimate metric to look at. What I like to look at, and now having known you, Jack, for almost 5 years, is return on time, right? We were talking off air, how we use our time, right? And time is the one asset that we all have in a finite capacity. It doesn't matter how much money you have, it doesn't how much. So you can think about ROI in terms of investments. That's great, but you should also be thinking about ROT in terms of time, because there probably isn't a billionaire who is 80 plus years that wouldn't give up a large part of their fortune to be 40 again, or to be 30 again, or to be 20 again, right? So time is really the most important factor that we have in our life. And we've built an entire city from culture to sports, right? We have from culture, we have now some of the biggest thought conferences and conventions and important conventions in the world. To sports, we now have Formula One, we have an MLS team, we have all the major sports teams. We're probably the only city in the world that has them all, and Formula One. Of course, we're working on our cultural facilities. We have Art Basel, which is one of the largest art shows in the world. And we're focusing on our public spaces. We just gave $3 million to fix our Central Park fountain. We're going to have something called the Underline, which we dedicated $100 million to, which is a linear park under our metro rail system. And we have the Underdeck, which is about a 40-acre park. These are all new. This is all new. And I think it's all based on the concept that we want people to have the best return on their time as Miami citizens. We think creating that kind of a offering, in addition to all the restaurants that are opening. I was just seeing an article today about a 2-star Michelin rated restaurant. We have 20 plus Michelin rated restaurants. We're opening up restaurants every single day. The city's clean, the city's safe, and it's a great place to live. And so that is a juxtaposition against what we saw in other American cities, where one city was kicking out Amazon after they won the HQ2 prize. Another city was saying F Elon Musk, and Elon Musk said message received and left. And it's not just about kicking out a $1 trillion company or someone that's worth a couple $100 billion. It's the signaling effect. You're saying, if you're successful, we don't want you. If you're going to create jobs, we don't want you. And at the same time, approximately on December 4th, 2020, somebody put out a tweet that said, hey, what if we move all of Silicon Valley to Miami? And I responded, how can I help? And the reason why it was, I wanted to send a message that our attitude is different. And if you're going to create, if you're going to invest, if you're going to create high-paying jobs, we want you. We want to build this ecosystem because we know it's the ecosystem of the future.
Well, thank you, Mayor. It's a hell of a resume you have there for the city of Miami. Mayor Adams here in New York would be jealous. I have to tell him about this conversation we had today. I also, want to add that the mayor mentioned that Miami has a surplus, and I think you purchased over $1 million of Israeli bonds, I believe. So
right.
Part of this support. Let me thank Akri, Jeff, Ahmed. I don't know if Ahmed is on. He actually works for American Jewish Congress and based out of Islamabad, Pakistan, which all of you will probably find interesting. And I'll get a bunch of calls. What are you doing there, Jack? But it is interesting what we're working on in the Middle East. I want to thank them for the support and putting this all together. So Akri, why don't you go ahead and start asking some questions.
Sure, Jack. So the first one is Dr. Munir Kazmir, the Vice President of the American Jewish Congress.
Yeah, let me just say this, introduce Munir. Munir is a Vice President of American Jewish Congress. Mayor, he's one of the most connected and probably one of the bigger fundraisers in the country, mostly for Republicans, by the way, Munir, but we get him to do some Democrats sometimes. He's an interesting person for you to get to know. So go ahead, Munir.
Would love to. By the way, I'm a Republican too, just in case I mentioned that earlier. Which is
Dr. Kazmir, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I submitted my question Akri, can you read my question? I submitted the question to Mayor.
Oh, give me just 1 second.
Thanks.
Okay, Mayor. So the question from Dr. Kazmir is, Republicans have done very well in the last couple of elections in Florida. What do you think has contributed to this performance so well across the entire state?
Well, thank you, Doctor, for that. And I'm going to give you two examples of an area where we're doing well and an area where we're not doing so well. The area where we're doing well is Miami. In 2016, when President Trump was elected, Republicans lost Miami-Dade County by 30 points to Hillary Clinton. I was elected in 2017, as Jack said, by close to 85%. And we started implementing these principles that I talked about to create prosperity in our city. And I think the immediate political benefit was we started to see people believe in our principles and start changing their voting habits. And even the people who migrated, there was a fear that the migration would hurt Republicans because a lot of these people were coming from quote unquote blue states. And it turns out that they were either Republicans or they changed to become Republicans. Because in 2020, the former president lost Miami-Dade County by 20 points. In 2018, the governor lost Miami-Dade County by 20 points. In 2020, the former president lost Miami-Dade County by 8 points. And in 2022, after my reelection by 80%, both the U.S. senator and the governor won Miami-Dade County by 10 points. So that is a complete 40-point swing. So, based in part, I think, on my leadership, I think I could pat myself a little bit on the back for this. And our success here in Miami, we took a county that was plus 30 for Democrats the year before I got elected to now plus 10 for Republicans currently. When you juxtapose that against Jacksonville, for example, in the last mayoral election, which was 4 years ago, the incumbent Republican mayor won by 24 points. There was a race that the governor supported the opponent of the person who won. Unfortunately, it was a Democrat, and that Democrat won by 4 points. So in Jacksonville, which is the congressional district of the governor that he used to serve in, that went 28 points Democrat. So we have to be careful, and we cannot rest on our laurels. We cannot take it for granted that the state went predominantly Republican. I think the last election was somewhat anomalous because the governor had a lot of money. His opponent was very weak. And you saw a very large margin, which is, something that we can't always count on. So we have to, I think, be humble, continue to focus on what has created gains, which is these policy wins of keeping taxes low, keeping people safe, and leaning into innovation. And that will continue to produce results for us as Republicans in Florida.
Thank you, Mayor. So Akri, I noticed David Kornstein was scheduled to be on the call. Are you on, David? I don't hear him. Okay, go ahead, Akri. If David gets on, I'd like him to ask a question.
I think he's joining.
David?
Yeah, I'm on.
How are you, David?
I'm good, Jack. How you doing?
Yes, good. So Mayor David Kornstein is, one of the leaders in New York City. When I say leaders, they're not always Jewish. It's not always about the Jewish community. He is one of the true business leaders, and he recently was the ambassador to Hungary. And I'm calling on good Republicans over here, Mayor. So I want you to meet David. You know the person you ought to get to know. Go ahead, David.
Wonderful.
Nice to meet you, Mayor. I can tell you the perception of how Jewish people are treated in Hungary and specifically in Budapest. The reality and the perception are very, very far apart. The Jewish people there are very happy, they're content, and most importantly, they're very, very safe. There's hardly ever any incident that happens in Hungary. And the reason that they've been successful is that the government, especially the Minister of Interior, who's in charge of the police and keeping law and order in the country. If there is an incident that takes place, that guy will not sleep at night. The minister will not sleep at night until they find who committed a crime. And when they find them, they have a very democratic, quick trial. And if they are found guilty, they are put away for a long, long time. There's no such thing as you're getting out on bail or any of the things that exists right now in New York City, for example. And the bad guys seem to know that this is an area you don't fool around with. And that's why they don't have any incidents, because the government is 100% behind them. I don't know how that compares to the city of Miami or the state of Florida or some other places, but I can tell you that that really, really works if you have the support of the government.
Well, Ambassador, I can tell you that I completely agree with you. And obviously, I don't like to generalize about Florida because, first of all, I run the largest city in Florida. I don't run the whole state. And it's hard to say because there's many states, many cities in Florida, and they're all different, and who runs them is different. But I'll tell you, in Miami, our posture is very similar to the one you described by the Minister of Interior of Hungary, right? And I'll give you an example specific. During the George Floyd demonstrations, right, that we saw across America, I came out and I was very, very, very clear when I said, if you destroy property or if you hurt anyone, you're going to be held accountable, period. We want you to, express your First Amendment rights. We know you have, the constitutionally protected right of free speech. It's one of the things that makes this country what it is and great. However, that right cannot be, you cannot infringe on the rights of others, right? You cannot hurt someone, you can't destroy property, you can't destroy someone's business. And, people got the message. We obviously were organized in terms of our police force. We didn't create confrontations, we monitored and we interjected ourselves when necessary, but we created the culture of accountability. And once that culture of accountability was established, then you have things like Antifa and, all these other organizations that are sent into certain cities to create problems. They didn't come to our city. They went somewhere else because they realized they weren't going to get any, to use another term we've talked about here, return on their investment, right? From being in our city and trying to create havoc. We were ready. We were prepared. We had a good chief at the time. They had a good strategy. And we were very clear in our message, which I think is the most important thing. You want to be clear as to what is in bounds and what is out of bounds and will not be tolerated.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Ambassador.
David is fine.
You're once an ambassador, you're always an ambassador, sir.
Got Akri. Who's next?
The next question is from Mr. Daniel Rosen, a board member of the American Jewish Congress.
Akri, take the next one. See what Dan gets on.
Okay.
You hear us, Dan? Just text Akri and myself and tell us you're ready. Go ahead.
So the next question then is from Mr. Kalman Sporn.
Kalman, are you there?
I am. I'm trying to get the video on. Oh, there we go.
There you go. You looked real handsome in that picture before, Kalman. Go ahead.
Thanks for the compliment. Mr. Mayor, I'm a DC-based lobbyist. It's great to meet you over Zoom. Thank you for all your good work on behalf of the Jewish people, the American Jewish Congress, and for Jack's friends. It's a privilege to speak with you. My question really relates to school safety and school security. Given recent anti-Semitic incidences and violence in schools nationwide, is your administration going to provide additional budgets for armed security and metal detectors in high schools? some school districts are mandating Claire school bags, like in Broward County, which I think is, as somebody that works in the defense space, in the defense sector, we know that these policies don't really help. And without security or actual metal detectors on a TSA level, really hard to keep our children safe. And I was curious what your thoughts on school safety and budgets again for school security might be.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's really important. I think first of all, you need to know that our school system is separate from the city. We unlike New York and Los Angeles, where agency. So they have a police force. There have been moments, depending on the circumstances, where we have collaborated and provided City of Miami police officers, specifically the schools in the city. And in the Jewish community in particular, we monitor activities both locally, nationally, and internationally to make sure that the schools in our city have adequate security, including but not limited to police security when necessary. We have a very low bar in terms of what it would require, because we like to err on the side of caution. We like to be, if anything, overly sensitive and overly protective, just because, first of all, we value the members of our community tremendously, and we listen to them, because oftentimes it will be at the request of a particular school, a particular shul, or a particular synagogue. And so we have a very, very free-flowing conversation, a very, very good connection with them. And they also do provide oftentimes armed security for themselves in a private capacity. So we work with them given their security needs.
I guess I was really talking just about the public schools and their needs.
Yeah. So like I said, we don't control the public school system. The city does not have any jurisdictional control. But like I said before, we have in multiple occasions at the request of the school board budgeted and provided specifically police officers, City of Miami police officers for our public school system. So we have done it in the past.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, Akri, go ahead. How much time do we have, by the way?
So we said around 45 minutes, so we have 10 more minutes for questions.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
Daniel Rosen.
Mayor, how are you?
Sorry.
When I met in Israel those years ago, so congratulations on all your successes.
Thank you.
We've all been reading a lot about the, let's call it the battle between the governor of Florida and the Disney company. And given some of your discussions about economic development and some of the success in Florida, how do you see that whole debate working in the best interest of Floridians and its sort of broader impact on the country?
Well, I think it's a great question, and I've been asked it on national television, and I've answered it in the way that I would handle it, right? I think, we start with the initial battle, which was a battle that I think politically was good for the governor, in the sense that I think most people believe that sexuality should not be taught to children K through third grade, right? That should be something that's in the purview of parents. And I think that was a winning argument. It's an 80% argument. And I think most people agree with that. Being a father of two children, I certainly agree. I don't want to have, I hope my children are not having those kinds of thoughts and conversations at that age to begin with. I certainly don't want it being prompted by schools. So that's a winning issue. The problem is you take that winning issue, and rather than, particularly when you had a new CEO and Bob Iger, you had an opportunity to cut a deal and say, look, everyone saves face and you move on. And that's not what happened. What happened is it seems like it got personal when you started trying to revoke their tax exempt status, which they basically used to create jobs and invest in your state. There was even threats that they were going to put a jail next to Disney. That's not productive, right? And when you're the governor of a state and your largest employer, I think they have 80,000 employees, is fighting with the CEO of the company, those 80,000 employees, many of which are probably working paycheck to paycheck, are now living under, under duress, right? They're worried now if something's going to happen because two C-suite executives are going at it. I've often said that, one of the issues that I think the governor is going to have to deal with in his presidential context is the fact that he has very little private sector experience. He's a smart guy, went to Harvard, Yale, worked, and I'm not diminishing his public sector experience. He went to the JAG and was a lawyer for the military, and then became a congressman and a governor. But there just wasn't a lot of private sector time. And when I see a fight like this, it makes me wonder if the lack of private sector experience. I'm a working mayor. 31 out of my 34 mayors work. And it's important to be tethered, in my opinion, to be connected to the private sector and understand how your policy decisions impact everyday people. And the disconnection of that is worrisome. We already saw Disney pull back $1 billion investment, which could have created thousands of jobs in the state. And that'll go somewhere else, right? If it doesn't come here, I know that there are Middle Eastern countries, for example, that are now vying for that business. So I think, that goes to the same issue that we're seeing with Democrats pushing people, Amazon out of New York, pushing Elon out of California. It's the same kind of attitude, which is if you don't play by our rules in the government, we don't want you. And that's not productive. I think, you can disagree with someone without getting personal and without doing stuff that will impact negatively your state. And you have to project that outwardly, right? Is that the kind of president that he's going to be? And that's problematic if so.
Okay. Yeah, and I think we got time for one more, Akri, and then I have one last question. So if you want to go, or you want me to ask the question?
So I can ask one question that was sent in by one of the audience members. So the question is about immigration. Immigration remains a perennial issue in modern Florida politics, as well as in American politics more generally.
Yep.
Is immigration an issue for the city of Miami? And if yes, what has been the city's approach? And to add to that, what are the lessons learned that you think would be worth sharing with leaders at the state level, but also in DC?
Well, look, I think this is such a large issue. It'll definitely take up to 5 minutes. Immigration is a national issue, as we know. Every city in America has essentially become a border city. We see Democrat mayors complaining about it in New York. I've been as far north as New Hampshire and heard, about it. And I'll say this, in a city like Miami, where we have a 1.7 or 1.8% unemployment rate, when you want to open up a business, it's hard to find employees. So I think we should turn what is a contentious issue into a strength for our country. How do you do that? I think you do that in several ways. One is you've got to connect immigration, legal immigration, to unemployment, right? There should be a nexus, there doesn't seem to be, to right-size legal immigration and connect it to unemployment. In an area like Miami, you may need immigrants to do the jobs that other Americans may not want to do. So that's one. Number two, I think we've got to take a long, hard look at our relationship with China. There's a lot of talk about it, but right now our trade deficit plus the IP that they steal on an annual basis is somewhere in the vicinity. I've seen figures as high as $1 trillion on an annual basis. So we're giving $1 trillion of our wealth to China. China is holding hostage, or is trying to hold hostage, or could potentially hold hostage our supply chain, and is also infiltrating our hemisphere and creating poverty in our hemisphere, which creates more immigration pressure. Now, the good news is that America and China have a similar problem. We both have declining birth rates. The difference is people want to come to America. Nobody wants to go to China, right? So that should be a strategic advantage for us if we use it properly. And then for the people that are here illegally or undocumented, I think we need to know who they are. We need to be able to identify them, make sure that there's no national security risks. And then, I think we've got to come up with some status for them that since we've kind of already, I think everyone agrees that it's impossible to export, to deport 10 million plus people, there has to be some sort of a status for them that can identify them, make sure that they're not a national security issue, and make sure that they're working and not getting any improper benefits. And then, of course, be respectful of the people who came in legally and did it the right way. And I think that's the third piece. And then, of course, the fourth piece is the border. Regardless of whether you are a Republican or Democrat, I think I don't think it's debatable right now that the border's out of control. We have 6 million people coming in an undocumented fashion, which is significantly more than before. You have 80 to 90,000 people dying of opioid overdoses that are flooding in from our Mexican border, being also sent in through China or by China. And that's the equivalent of a 747 crashing every single day. So keep that in mind. Imagine if a 747 was crashing every single day in America. That would be a national tragedy every single day. And we would dedicate the resources and the attention needed to solve that problem immediately. And yet we're not treating the border in the same crisis fashion as we would an equivalent crisis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right. So the big question that America has to answer shortly is who's going to be our next president. The Republican Party's got an interesting primary season coming up.
Sure.
You're one of the leading, political folks in the country, and certainly leading Republican. I wonder if you might want to comment on that. And, you do come from a wing that most of us on this phone probably would tend to lean towards rather than, the more right-wing folks. So give us your own point of view on this and where it heads. And
so my point of view is, and I've said this publicly, I've been very vocal about this. I'm, strongly considering running for president myself, and adding myself to the conversation. I think
we're the first Jewish organization that had him say that. So get that in the press. I'm just kidding you, Chris.
Yeah, and I would say that, adding myself to the conversation, if I end up doing it, is important because we want to tell a story of Miami's success, which we think is a template for America's success, keeping taxes low, our budgets balanced, keeping people safe in urban America, very important, and leading into innovation and understanding that the world is changing rapidly. We think that's a successful formula for American prosperity, number one. Number two, you want a leader who can expand the party, right? And not only win an election, but can win in a generation of elections. And I think Democrats have been very deficient when communicating with Hispanics by calling them Latinx or by saying they're as unique as San Antonio tacos. And I think it gives an opportunity for a Hispanic leader to speak to the country, 20% of the country, bring them over to the Republican side, and maybe even fix things like immigration, which I think would be helped by having a Hispanic Republican president. And then when you think about where the world is going, we need to feel good about our country. Right now, we don't feel good about our country. Under the current administration, the poor get poor, the poor gets poor, America gets weaker, and China is the lone superpower. Right? That is not a world I want my kids to grow up in. I want my kids to grow up in a world where we're getting stronger, where our supply chain is reinforced, where our immigration policy is in our best interest, and where we are growing again. And the strongest force for liberalization and democracy and liberty on the planet. And of course, that means strengthening our relationships with countries like Israel. Of course, that means having a functioning working relationships with countries in the Middle East. Of course, that means strengthening our relationship with G7 countries and countries like India, who now lead the G20. We have to continue to project American strength. We've got to do it by also continuing to focus on our domestic issues. And we need a leader that can bring us together. As you said, Jack, I was blessed to be elected by 85% and reelected by close to 80%, because I focus on solving problems rather than blaming someone for it. And we have a culture in Washington of blaming people for problems rather than solving them. And I think a fresh voice, a fresh perspective, and a fresh energy could reinvigorate the discussion in 2024.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with you. You're the kind of leadership we need in America today. And I can't on this call encourage you to run or not run, but you're certainly a terrific leader out there. And I encourage all of our friends, and let me apologize, we couldn't get to all of you for questions, but I encourage you to get to know Mayor Suarez, engage with him. He's a true friend and a great leader, and somebody that I think you'd enjoy talking to and building a relationship with together. Thank you all for joining.